10 reasons not to move to Japan. Number 10, it's crowded. Now, I'm basically talking about Tokyo because that's where I live. You can go out to the country. It's not for everybody. But if you live in Tokyo, just get used to being in lots of crowds. If you've been to a place like New York City or you've lived in a big city, no problem. It's a kind of a seamless adjustment. But I came from a small town and it was a big shock for me. Number 9, friends. When you move to Japan, you're going to leave all your friends back home. And sure, they may email you or, you might Skype or FaceTime every once in a while. Eventually they'll forget about you. You can make new friends in Japan. It's a little bit harder. I found that most of my friends in Japan are other foreigners. Problem with that is so many people moving in and out that you make friends with somebody and they leave, you got to start over again. Number 8, food. Now, Tokyo is a diner's paradise. More Michelin star restaurants than anywhere else in the world from what I hear. But you kind of got to get used to Japanese food. And sometimes your Japanese colleagues will have a blast giving you stuff that they think is going to gross you out. Number 7, earthquakes. We have earthquakes every day. Sometimes you don't even notice them. Sometimes you do, and people forget about them very quickly. But they do happen all the time. They can be devastating. Have an earthquake kit and make sure your home is earthquake proof if you decide to move to Japan. Number 6, you represent every other foreigner. So if a streamer comes over and causes trouble, people are going to blame you for that. They're going to ask you to explain that person's actions. This is why foreigners get the most upset, sometimes more than Japanese, when a streamer comes over to Japan and causes trouble. I don't believe in collectivism. It's a big thing in Japan. So I guess I represent every other white person in Japan. So I'm sometimes asked to explain, why did this person do that? Why does this country do that? Why does your country do that? Like, I have no idea. I don't get involved in politics. It really has no place on my channel. I might talk about it if I talk about it in a historical sense, but I just don't pay attention to what goes on politically or otherwise, because I want to keep this channel positive and have fun. Number 5, the work environment. Now, I can make a whole video about this. The work environment can be toxic, and you can be expected to attend a lot of long, boring meetings where nothing gets decided. You can be expected to stay late at the office when there's nothing to do because other people are still there, and it's considered rude to leave early. Especially if your boss is still there, it's considered rude to leave before the boss. So I got a couple stories of friends that I've worked with. I rarely tell stories about myself because I don't want the people I worked with to hear them and think I'm talking about them. But this happened to a friend of mine, came over to Japan, was sent over here at the company's request. He didn't really want to come, but they said, well, since we're sending you, we'll pay for your rent. We'll pay for annual leave, one trip back home once a year, and we'll give you a bump in pay. Come to find out, he was making a lot more than his colleagues in the office. And he'd only been at the company about a year. Some of these people had been there 5 or 10 years. But he was, mid-level management and they were office workers. But he was given a lot more pay. And they found out. Now, I don't know how they found out. Now, this ended up causing him a lot of trouble. Even though it wasn't something he had actually done, the company had decided to pay him more than the other coworkers. But they made his life hell for the next 2 years until he rotated back to the States. The work environment can be very harsh because you're in a high context culture where people have all grown up following the same rules. And if you speak a little Japanese, they expect you to have absorbed all these rules. And so if you make a mistake, they won't tell you what the mistake was, but they will make sure and punish you for it. And they'll make sure that your life is hell. Now, this is not everybody. Some places are an absolute dream to work at, but some places can be really difficult. And it's not because you're a foreigner. They do this to each other. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine worked in purchasing at a big Japanese company, used to torture the salespeople that came to visit her company for fun. And here's how she did it. When a new salesperson would come, she would go through the company's requirements and ask them questions about their product until she found something that they didn't know. And she would say, okay, go back to your office and find out, and then come back and tell me. At every meeting, she would do this, and this process would go on for months. And I asked, why do you do this? And she had this wicked grin. She said, because I can. Number 4, wages. They haven't really gone up in the past 30 years. When I first came to Japan in 1990, I got a copy of the Japan Times, that's the English newspaper, and I was looking for a job teaching English. I found jobs that were paying about 300,000 yen. Fast forward to 2014, I came back to work in Japan. I had gone through undergrad and law school and came back to Japan with a job, but just out of curiosity, I opened the Japan Times and looked for English teaching jobs to kind of get an idea of how things had changed. And immediately I saw an ad for English teachers paying 300,000 yen per month. Wages hadn't changed in 34 years. And Japanese workers don't really get paid that much. That's why a lot of young people still live at home. I don't know the solution to this, But there are a lot of Japanese people going to Australia right now for a 1-year working holiday visa. Because the yen is so low, they can go work in Australia and make money and bring that back and have more money than if they had stayed in Japan and worked for a year. Number 3, housing. You get a lot less bang for your buck in Tokyo. Now, like I said, I live in Tokyo, so when I talk about Japan, I'm actually talking about Tokyo. If you move out to the country, it's not for everybody. You might get a little bit bigger place, but you're not going to have all the convenience of living in a city like Tokyo or Osaka. So if you don't mind living in a dormitory-sized apartment, yeah, Tokyo might be for you. If you're used to living in a place like New York City, prices in Tokyo might actually seem cheaper. But for most people coming from a small town like me, rent seems pretty high in Tokyo. Fortunately, you don't need a car in Tokyo, so that kind of offsets the expenses. Now, number 2 is the weather, and I'm filming in July, and it's 30 degrees at night. It gets up to 35, 38 degrees during the day, and I'll put the Fahrenheit down here. You know, that's really not that hot when you translate to Fahrenheit, but when you add the humidity, it's like walking around in a wet sleeping bag. Now, not only does it get really hot in the summer, we also have typhoons. We have rainy season. Sometimes it rains so much that things just slide down the mountain. But the number one reason not to move to Japan is you're going to be away from family. I miss you, Mom.